There's Mariano on the live cam. All right. Welcome everybody to the February 13th, I believe, edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting. My name is Richard Brown. I'm the head of community development for MakerDAO. Today we are going to be talking about something very interesting. I say interesting at the beginning of every single call, but I'm not going to stop doing it because it is. Mariano has a treat for us. I'm hoping that I'm smart enough to follow along because this we're getting into some dark magic here, and I'm excited to hear what that's all about. He's also in transit right now, so I think Mariano, is the idea that Will's going to pick it up for you, or are you going to rush to the hotel?
Yeah, no, I'm just here to say that this is something very interesting. I'm gonna be heading to the hotel, but Will work on the presentation and the code, and he's gonna show it to everybody. So yeah, can't wait for you all to see what this is about.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Mariano. Your dedication to the cause has been noted. It'll go in your employment record. So I'm trying to figure out what the appropriate schedule would be. I think that there's going to be a significant number of questions about the dark fix and the GSM. Those are very complex topics and becoming more topical by the day. As close watchers of the ecosystem, I guess. Maybe we'll leave that for the second half of the call. LongForWisdom, I'm going to throw you under the bus. I mean, hand things off to you if you want to give us governance at a glance, perhaps, and then do you have a special thread that you want to talk about, or should we stick to governance at a glance?
I think we'll stick to governance at a glance.
Right.
Yeah, there's a couple of threads that are interesting, but we'll see how it goes. Cool. Okay, yeah, so this week we've had a fair bit of discussion and a couple of signal threads are still active. So, yeah, I guess one of the most interesting discussions to pop up was the one created by Joshua Pritikin in response to 15,000 Maker voting to increase the DSR spread to 2%. So I thought that was quite cool because it's one of the first time, not the first time, but one of the major times when people have sort of seen how Maker holders are voting and gone like, the fuck, and sort of started talking about it, which is kind of cool.
Do you feel that there was so this is something we've talked about a lot, where politicians and campaigners, I'm losing my camera. Can you guys still hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
I don't know what's going on with my camera. The politicians and campaigners and parties will arise, and then people will begin asking questions and sort of agitating for change or demanding answers and stuff. And I think this is one of the first highly visible examples of that. So is there an idea that whoever it was that was voting for 2% reconsidered, or was it just?
It looks likely that the person in question decided to change their vote to 0.5%, which is currently winning, as like a compromise like option, right? Like they saw they weren't going to win 2% and then moved to 0.5%, or possibly they actually reconsidered. It's hard to tell, but yeah, so that was pretty cool. I posted some of the history of what the distribution of the poll looked like in that thread, but briefly, 2% started off winning with like the only sort of major Maker holder voting. And then we had sort of large amounts of Maker drop onto 0% and 0.5% as well. 0% was winning for a while, and then with the move from 2% to 0.5%, that's now winning, and I think that's finished now. So I'm assuming that one. I haven't checked. So yeah, it was pretty interesting to see that happen, to be honest.
Well, I don't want to wreck your agenda here, but speaking of what's winning and what's not winning, we also had a signal for technical fixes versus monetary policy. Do we have a result on that?
Yeah, I believe it passed. Again, I will double check. It had like sort of 20k Maker in favor when I last checked. That was like half an hour ago.
That's an interesting one. Maybe you can speak a bit about the implications of this, because it's important that people internalize the fact that we have sort of a priority of decision making coming into effect now.
Sure. Yeah, so for those not aware, this was a signal thread about how to handle bundling of executives, specifically bundling emergency technical fixes with like regular monetary policy changes. And like, let's double check. Yeah, so that passed with 100% agreement. So yeah, the decision was to suspend regular monetary policy polls, or like do not include regular monetary policy votes in the executive if there's an emergency technical fix to go in, because it might in some way affect like how quickly the technical fix passed. So what that means is that some entity kind of needs to be in charge of defining what is an emergency change for both monetary policy and like technical changes. According to the vote, so according to the wording of the vote, which I wrote, the foundation technical team, which is admittedly a bit vague, is like the sort of authority to say whether something is an emergency or not. And the interim risk team is the authority for saying if a monetary policy change is an emergency or not.
Yeah, that raises a really interesting dynamic that didn't exist previously. So we're in a world now where the community has voted and determined that if there's a problem with a system, that needs to be fixed first. And because we have continuous approval voting, we are unwilling to run the risk of bundling potentially unappealing monetary policy with potentially important technical fixes, or vice versa. It creates too much of a risk of a weak executive not allowing a fix to go through. For that to happen, groups of empowered actors need to, I don't know what's the word for it, come to an agreement, I guess, negotiate on which is more important, the fix or the monetary policy.
Yeah.
And it also is kind of an interesting segue into what Will and/or Mariano will talk about later, because these are the types of fixes that we'd be considering to suspend monetary policy.
Yeah. So yeah, like there's some details in the thread for that signal request if anyone wants to read more into it. But yeah. Okay, so continuing with active discussions. So we had a newcomer to the forum, Andy Totope, I think. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Summarize the suggestion by the original suggestion by Adam Skrodsky. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. About doing continuous polling as well as like the continuous executive approval. This is quite an interesting idea. I'll give a brief gist of it, which is that instead of having new polls every week, we just have, say, a single poll that has like, again, it's a little bit difficult for the stability, but has like all the stability fee options, perhaps in a continuous way. And then as Maker changes on that poll, as we go through weeks, if at any point the picture painted by the continuous polls is different from the active picture in the Maker protocol, then we would create an executive vote to capture the changes for that week. I forget now what the reasons for doing this were, but there's some details in that thread.
Yeah, it's worth. If somebody could put, I'm stuck with only one monitor like a farmer, but if somebody can dig up the link to that post and stick it in the side, yeah, that'd be great. There's interesting. Anyway, sorry. Let me condense all the big speechifying I was about to do. We keep on butting up against limitations of continuous approval and first past the post, and I think that it's worth the community digging into this discussion too and having a look at that poll. Andy is an active member of the community. He's a deep thinker and a very smart guy. He's from previously a status, possibly still. I'm not entirely sure, but it's worth, when Andy is interested in your ecosystem, it's worth paying attention.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I actually thought about this was that, as you mentioned, we sort of run up into some limitations of continuous approval voting. And like this change would actually make the polls like more like the executives rather than trying to move the executives to be more like the polls, which I thought was an interesting suggestion. So yeah, strongly recommend reading that if you're interested. Cool. So the other one I want to highlight was I made a thread to summarize some of the suggested improvements for the state of the peg graphs that Vishesh normally presents. There's so I sort of correlated some of the ideas that were discussed and some other ones that we've had previously. There's polls in there for you to like vote on which ones you think are the most important. It's not really an official signaling thing because it's not going to change anything, but just as a polling exercise. So if you have ideas for improvements for the state of the peg section, or you want to, like weigh in on the ideas that are currently in there, that might be useful. To sort of give Rashesh and Sam and the people responsible for those some direction. Cool. So moving on to signal requests. Again, we've got quite a lot of these active at the moment, potentially too many, but we'll go through them as I can. So most recently, a user called Bits created a signal request for discussing what the next ETH debt ceiling should be for MCD. Basically, so this guy has sort of been fairly vocal in the past about us increasing the debt ceiling more than perhaps we've considered in the past, and has sort of summarized that in a signal request and asked for people's input. So if anyone does have opinions on that, I would suggest sharing them there. Interestingly, it's sort of part of the discussion is whether we should sort of continue to let the interim risk team like make those decisions, or whether we should sort of take, I guess, a more active role, or like whether Maker token holders or governance should take an active role in determining how that is set.
Well, that's an interesting question too, because the risk team was sort of empowered with some extra migration responsibilities. We had no idea what migration was going to look like. As a brave new world that was completely unexplored, and so the thinking was, and the vote or proposal that went through was that the risk team would be able to make fairly rapid changes to the system in response to a bunch of unknown variables. But at some point, we're going to have to determine whether migration is over and or ending. That's an interesting question that needs to be addressed. Like, Cyrus, is there some metric, or is it shut down, or when did it happen?
Well, to answer the first question about the debt ceiling, so just as a reminder, I mean, kind of the current heuristic we're using is just these 25 million increases until kind of to just satiate the community appetite until we can kind of start to unleash this essentially like a governance V2, where we can start taking a more quantitative approach to how some of these parameters might be derived. It additionally, due to, and people tend to forget this all the time, but due to the OSM risk, we should never, even if the maximum tolerable debt ceiling is in the hundreds of millions, we would never just set the debt ceiling immediately to that number, but we would always use incremental increases for safety's sake. So as long as we're not accidentally going beyond any of the kind of the safe thresholds with these 25 million increases, then I don't see like any huge issues there. And then with regards to migration, I mean, personally, I still consider us heavily in a migration phase. It's a topic that comes up on a weekly basis. I think, I mean, that's really kind of a community appetite decision, right? We kind of have been at the same time weaning off single collateral discussions, but there's still some questions around the potential tax, about what to do with the remaining 20 million or so PSI, and then when to actually trigger emergency shutdown. So I kind of think we are still in migration phase.
I feel like some of the, maybe not sort of disagreement, I don't think it's like active disagreement, but like it's almost like we're in like a migration or like shutdown phase for PSI still, but potentially not entirely in the migration phase for MCD anymore, because like the larger majority of like the PSI is migrated, right? So like I would say most of the demand for like MCD is now probably new rather than migrating. So maybe that's a reason to consider that.
Yeah, and to highlight a metric from last week's call, I think Primoz said something like 300 wallets are the owners of 90% of the side debt. So
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. I mean we can. I mean I don't think we've ever really discussed like an exit strategy out of the migration phase. I think I always kind of implicitly assumed it would be. Actually, I don't know what I thought it would be, but yeah, that's a good stage. I mean, that's a good point. If we want to officially declare ourselves out of the migration phase, that's possible. But as it pertains to kind of like the debt ceilings and that kind of stuff, I mean, I think that kind of the current plan of just these small increases when we start to hit against the debt ceiling is okay for now until we come up with a more long-term plan.
Cool. All right. Continuing through signal threads then. So one that's been up for a little while now is questioning whether we should reduce the minimum bid increase required for surplus auctions. So like the flap auctions, which auction off maker for DAI and then auction off DAI for maker and then burn the maker. There we go. So I think Aaron's been running this. I don't know if Aaron wants to talk about it briefly, but
yeah, I can talk about it briefly if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I noticed, so we've been going, what, 2 weeks now with flap auctions almost. And I noticed that most of the auctions were only having one person bidding. And so what I was noticing was that it looked like the first person who was bidding, a great resource for this actually, before I continue, is daiauctions.com. And you can go to flaps. I'm just going to go here so I can talk about it better. So they have the kicks, and that's where the auctions start off, the 10,000 DAI. And so what I was noticing was that pretty much only one person was bidding. And so I think that the 3% is the minimum bid increment. So if you bid just under 3% of what the current maker price is, you can pretty much be the only bidder, because no one's going to overbid what the actual DAI to maker price is currently, because then they wouldn't be able to sell it back and then make more money. So my proposal was that we could reduce that percentage so that more people could, either maker holders could then capture more of the of that spread in maker burn. Yeah, do you have any? That's pretty much the basics of it.
Yeah, cool,
if
thanks.
I may, I will say that in the case of flap auctions, it's just, if you're the fastest, if you lower it to 1%, then people will, like the fastest one will bid close to 1%. And I don't know, maybe it creates some different dynamics. I don't know what everybody thinks, but I guess in this case, it just pays to be the fastest. I've seen that the bidder almost always bids like with 101 gigaways of gas, right? So they pay like $7 in gas to really be the first bid under 3%.
Oh, is it that much? But yeah, it looks like. But I mean, so keepers right now, they're capturing like 3% spread, and over $10,000. You know, that's an extra $300 that they're probably a minimum that they're profiting off of. And so I don't know. So I just made a signal thread to see if maker holders want to reduce that, so we could capture more value.
Yeah, I'd worry that if the spreads get too narrow on that, we'd actually see less market participants. And even though there is one participant that keeps winning these bids, there are other participants competing for it.
You worry that there wouldn't be any, that it would reduce market participants?
Yeah, I think if the profit margins get smaller, it would scare people away from participating. Like Mariano said, it's really a game of who can get their bid in first.
Right.
And you still have the same problem with the 1% versus a 3% rule, right?
Right.
Just with the 1% rule, you're putting the bidder at more of a risk for like the volatility MKR, right?
Interesting. So yeah, so I guess so as the results as they are right now for the signal request, it looks like 2% is beating. So I think 2% had. Let me just go to it. Sorry, 1 second.
35% for 2%.
What do you have it up? Do you have it right there?
Yeah, 35%.
So 35%. I have it right here. Sorry. So 2% is winning with 35%, and 1% is second with 30%, and current, which is 3%, has 13%. So there is some appetite to maybe experiment with it a little bit. 3% just changed; it's increased to 20% now. So I was thinking it's been up for a little bit. I figured I'll talk to Rich and maybe I'll put it on chain with 1, 2, and 3% just to see if there is an appetite for that change.
So I have a question for Ed. I mean, I agree with your point completely, but I think the only way to find out if the market participants would be willing to tolerate a lower spread is to just try it for a bit, right? And see the data and then move it back if we need to. I mean, I don't see any other easy way to find out what a good trade-off is between participation and the spread.
Yeah, I mean, nothing beats empirical evidence, right?
Right.
Yeah, well, that was the whole idea, right? We were the best guesses for MCD launch and then tweaking once we have empirical data, right? But I don't involve myself with auctions because I'm not smart enough to understand them. So let me ask some really dumb questions. Mariano, are you saying that regardless of the spread and the mechanisms involved, that essentially this is just a high frequency trading problem and that whoever gets there first wins no matter what? Or are you saying that that's just the system we have right now? I might have got him during check-in. So if somebody else wants to jump in, like Cyrus, is that the model we have here?
I mean, that's not quite an accurate representation, but the issue is that there are, I think it's, the data indicates that people are willing to tolerate a lower spread, and as a result, they're bidding high in the gas auction, in the gas game to secure that bid position to guarantee themselves the auction. So like if the auction's going to win $300, like how much would you pay to win $300?
Yeah.
Up until a point that we have to
sorry, delay or something. So I'm trying to figure out if this is an auction or if this is a race, if it's like, what is there's no price discovery going on in the mechanism we have right now, obviously, because there's only one person using it, right?
No, there's multiple people. It's just one guy is winning.
Let me try and sort of summarize it. So it is an auction, but because everyone knows that the minimum bid is like 3%, it means you can never bid like less than 3% than the current price. So if you want to win, like the optimal thing to do is to immediately bid for like that 3%, or like as close to winning to pay for that 3%.
So it's not really an indictment of the system. It sounds like that's enormously efficient and probably what the world would want out of something like this, right?
Maybe,
but I think the issue is, so MKR holders are losing out on 300, right? 300 DAI per auction in order to ensure that you have a swift and immediate resolution to the auction. Could they achieve that same function with, say, just 200 DAI? Right? Because the benefit that we're getting in is that there's somebody coming in immediately and bidding on the auction.
Do you guys feel like this is maybe like a non-issue type of thing? Are we what is the goal of what we're doing? Is it to increase the amount of participants? Is it to increase the amount of bids? Because the way I see it, seems to be working like perfectly fine.
Yeah, it's working great. Can we make it work even better for maker holders?
Well, it wouldn't be for maker holders, it'd be for keepers, right? Or I guess maybe for maker holder. Well, how would it benefit maker holders if the spread was smaller? It would just end up eating a little bit more MKR over time. Well, not a little bit, things compound, right? But
Exactly.
yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
There's a fairly
Yeah.
vibrant discussion going on in the sidebar. So if anybody there wants to join us verbally, you can. Otherwise, we can potentially keep the ball rolling here.
Hey
I
guys.
can count on you.
Hey guys, can you hear me? This is Mike Newman. I would just say when we moved from version 1 of the original system to this new auction system, 10,000K is quite a bit of chunk of change to participate in this process, and I wasn't quite happy with it being set that high when we set all the system variables. So I just want to throw that out there. I know we're talking a lot about efficiency of 1%, 2%, 3%, but myself as a much smaller keeper, I can't participate in that kind of level of funds. So the system will move on without me in that process, but you're knocking out smaller players by setting it that high, but maybe it's good for system security. I don't know what the game.
That's interesting. Cyrus, do you have an opinion about that? Like, is smaller lots the answer as opposed to different spreads?
So the thing is, for like lots that are too much smaller than that, like assuming that you're kind of somebody who's just trying to offload MKR, kind of secondary exchanges would probably be better because the slippage is so minuscule for smaller lot sizes, especially with kind of the increase in MKR liquidity. And then the downside is if the lot sizes are too small, it'll just kind of be a lot of overhead and friction for having just like, right, imagine if the lot size was say 1,000, then all of a sudden we'd have 10 times as many auctions. They'd be running 10 times a day. If it was set even smaller to like accommodate the smallest of retail, let's say 100, we'd be having 100 auctions a day. And that's at the current level of burn rate, right? So through increased growth, increased DAI adoption, or increase in the DSR spread, that burn rate we could already, I should hope that, even at the current lot size, the number of auctions increases to multiple per day. So given that there's like an alternative avenue for smaller holders to offload their MKR and potential friction, my opinion is that I think it's fine. I don't know if others have other opinions.
It's also been pointed out that flash loans have come onto the scene now, so I'm still trying to understand, how prevalent that's happening now. But that definitely sort of evens the playing field a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and kind of new technological advances like that, like flash loans is definitely not something that factored into these initial parameters.
Quick point, flash loans actually won't work for the auction because it needs to happen in one block.
But what about the surplus? Oh yeah. It doesn't work for the auctions.
That's my bad.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why initially I looked at that. I forgot about that. Yeah, it wasn't going to work for me.
What about a 30-minute flash loan or like a 10-minute flash loan? With like, that could be interesting.
Not flash anymore, but I understand if we're having higher volume of auctions in the future, it probably doesn't make sense to lower that threshold. So I defer to the system's efficiency in that case.
Made the spread instead of 3%. Let's just imagine you made it 10 or even 20. Wouldn't that also encourage a more vibrant participation in the auctions?
No, hold on. Are you talking about? Well, the 3% is talking about the minimum bid increase, right? So if you had a 10% minimum bid increase, that would just kind of like break the auctions or give people like a really huge profit margin. No.
But then it's possible for someone to have a profit margin, but wouldn't you encourage more people? Like if you knew you could make $1,000 in an auction, well, then you'd bid against it because you could potentially get that. And then I would bid it, then somebody else would bid it.
But that comes into gas problems again, the gas race, right? So then everyone's just wasting their money on gas to be the first.
The only people benefiting there are the miners.
Yeah, because if somebody comes in and says, "All right, I'm gonna bid 9% discount to the current price," and it's a 10% minimum bid increment. It's the same thing that we're experiencing here, right? With it just being a first to the door winner type situation.
I think you could look at the extent to which they're paying the miners in the gas price as an indicator for if that spread could go down, right? Because if the spread kept going down, then people would start paying less in gas until gas prices are reasonable enough, and that's maybe the equilibrium point for what the keepers are willing to take, right? Does that make sense?
Right. Actually, guys, I'm going to. This is a super spicy conversation. I think that we need to continue to dig into this, but let's pick it up again at the end of the call during the Q&A session. Because speaking of spicy, there's a fantastically complex presentation that Will has been waiting in the wings to present to us, and I think there's going to be some additional conversations there. I don't want to put you on the spot, Will, but this better be good. No, I'm just kidding. So Will is going to discuss some very significant, or at least touch on some very significant issues in the ecosystem that have surfaced recently around governance. At least it touches on what governance means in a decentralized world, what impact GSM security versus flexibility have, and from a technical perspective, how do we address technical issues without showing our cards that there's a bug in the system. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Will.
Great, thank you, Rich. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Cool. My name is Will Barnes. I'm a smart contract developer here at Maker. We've spent a lot of time trying to.
That's not good. Is he blocked up for everybody or just me?
Uh-oh. Yeah, he's gone for me as well.
Me as well.
After I pitched it that hard, this is not great.
Hello?
Come back, Will.
Can you hear me?
Come back.
I can hear you. You're not.
Welcome back.
And we lost you.
Not sure he's fully back yet.
All right, let's give it a minute or two. And if that doesn't work, then maybe we'll have to wait for Mariano to get to his room. All right. So who wants to talk? Who wants to talk about auctions?
There's one more
Wanna
signal
keep it
request
going?
I could find.
All right, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the only
Mariano?
other one was. Oh,
All
are they
right.
back?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I'll chat with Mariano directly.
Okay. The only other one that I sort of didn't quite get to was Sam put up a signal request related to the frequency of the DSR spread poll, which is ongoing. So if anyone hasn't voted on that, I would consider doing that as well.
Hey, don't mean to interject. Can you hear me now? I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, you're back now. There's two of you, but one of you is working.
Ah, okay. Well, I will start over. I'm just going to share my screen. So wanted to discuss this in the context of the technical solution, not less about the merits for the argument of GSM delay and for having a non-zero GSM delay. I think everyone kind of understands the dichotomy that we have here. Right now, Maker has a GSM delay of 0, which pretty much gives us the ability to patch bugs instantaneously. But on the flip side, that opens us up to a governance attack. And if we go the other way and introduce a non-zero delay, any kind of bug patches that we have to do will basically sit on chain where anyone can see it, anyone can reverse engineer it and exploit it while waiting for the delay to pass. So yeah, these are the two conflicting risks we're trying to balance here. And we spent a good deal of personal hours figuring out how to kind of strike a balance between this. So the proposed solution that we have is called a dark fix, and it's actually quite simple. It pretty much takes the same, so it uses the same infrastructure that we use today to deploy changes to the system, like executive votes to the system. The process is that a bug fix is developed and tested against the deployment on Kovan, or however we choose to test the fix. But where it gets interesting is we actually fingerprint this bug fix, the bytecode, which from now on we will just refer to it as the dark fix, which really just, all it is we're just taking the bytecode, predetermining deploy address for that bytecode, and then we're pointing the spell at that deploy address, which would be sitting on chain as just an externally owned address. There would be no bytecode that you could see there. So after that, we schedule the dark fix, wait for the GSM delay to pass, and then via an atomic transaction, we actually deploy the bug fix. In this case, referring to it as the dark fix, which gives it the dark name because no one really can see what's going on. They can't see the actual code. That code is deployed to the predetermined address, and then it's instantly executed and the bug is patched. So some things that are interesting about this is that only that bytecode could be deployed at that address. Any changes in it would result in an entirely different address. It would be, the spell wouldn't be, the address wouldn't be this address that the spell is pointing at, so the fix would fail. So there's a lot of security provided by that cryptographic primitive there that makes this situation or this solution unique and very secure. So
I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting ahead. So what we're doing here is we have this, just to reframe things, we have this trade-off, like I said, security versus flexibility. So do we either fix the system immediately, or do we remove the possibility for governance capture, and where in the middle do we land on these things? And this is a very fascinating technical fix.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does is it moves a significant amount of coordination back up to the social layer. So at some point there needs to be, okay, we have a problem, MakerDAO ecosystem, and how do we talk about what that problem is, and how do we convey the seriousness of that problem in a way that doesn't tip the cards? So can somebody speak to like how the social gets managed?
I think we should wait until Will finished his presentation. We talk about this quite extensively. So at the end, there's time for questions and answers. Sorry to cut you off there, but that will be more efficient.
Let's maximize for efficiency then. All right, go ahead, Will.
Yep. Well, why is this the optimal solution? Well, the main reason is that a GSM delay can be introduced. And I think that was there's been a lot of discussion around that since mid-December. So the solution allows that to happen. The second thing is that this solution is cryptographically secure. It cannot be reverse engineered. There's no bytecode that sits on chain. No one can see what's being fixed. So I think that's important because, yeah, the issue that we had before was that any bug fix would just be sitting open source. So it's it's a big deal breaker, and it would just be, I think it would be catastrophic if we tried to do that without just letting it sit for however long the delay is. But so yeah, cryptographically secure. If this crypto primitive is broken, this is just the create to opcode, so it's a EVM opcode. It's pretty much just one more argument than create. I know it's a bit of a technical jargon there, but if this crypto primitive is broken, basically you can say the whole internet is broken. There'd be other issues to worry about, but yeah, the bug fix isn't deployed until we're past the delay and we actually cast the spell. It's applied immediately. So two things that also I wanted to point out is that this isn't just one solution, narrow. It's the only thing that can be done. Emergency shutdown can still be triggered anytime during this process. And with sufficient maker to do that. And secondly, an alternative to that is that the community can drop the dark fix spell with MKR majority vote or enough to take the hat. So if the community prefers that this is, or if they find that they don't like the solution, that is an option. So as Rich was mentioning, how do we build trust by doing this? It moves things back up to the social layer, and there's also some things to consider when you have a critical vulnerability. How do you share the code? How do you express that to people? I mean, what kind of quorum do you want to make that decision and actually deploy the code and fix the vulnerability? So right now, in conjunction with voting, major MKR stakeholders that explicitly back this dark fix will be asked to cryptographically sign an approval message. and this is really done to just bolster community trust in the process, because it is a very sensitive issue. I think you have to be quite cognizant of who knows that there's an exploit and how kind of information propagates. But that this is a mechanism we're working on in tandem, how to get, or having Maker stakeholders sign a message that says they saw, or that they were informed of the bug fix. They understand what the dark fix is and what it's going to fix, and signal support to the greater community. So, and again, I wanted to, there's 2 points here. Reminder, this emergency shutdown can still be triggered anytime during this process. That is preserved throughout the whole process. And again, this bug fix, anytime during delay before it's cast, can be dropped from the delay queue. So just to summarize everything, and we walked through a pretty technical concept here, but these are to demonstrate the pros and cons that this gives us. Is we now, when we introduce GSM delay, we now have reduced exposure to governance attacks, depending on the delay that's chosen. It preserves all the other options we've just been through, though there are some cons. With the dark fix, it still openly signals that there's a known critical vulnerability in the system. And this is a bit psychological too, because in software, there's always bugs. And I think that's reasonable expectation, no matter if it's blockchain, Web 2. You can argue that it'll draw increased scrutiny for however long the delay is, but it should be known that it still openly signals that there's some vulnerability. And secondly, if someone's actively attacking MCD, and we could potentially defend it with the spell, this fix will not allow us to do that. The GSM delay will still apply. We could use the dark fix, but we'd still have to wait for the delay to pass before we could cast it. So if someone was exploiting something, we wouldn't be able to counter it as quickly. So knowing the solution now, there's some next steps that we're highlighting here. We're confident that this solution balances pretty much. It gives us the best. I'd say there are some things that we lose, right? We can't just patch things instantly. We still have to wait for the delay. So we do give us a little bit. We do introduce a timeline, but this captures just about most of what we had before. So it's a good balance between reducing exposure to governance attacks and just allowing us to still have some modicum of secrecy while we patch a bug. So we have developed a smart contract implementation for this dark fix, which you can see here. It's public repo. You can run the test yourself and provide any feedback for those of you who are interested, or for your technical folks or anyone who just wants to see what the implementation looks like. So we propose, really, with this new information, to wait an additional week, let everyone think it over, form opinions around it, and review the code. If you have any questions, I would love to hear them and hear what the community has to say. And after that, I'm actually at ETH Denver if anyone would like to chat about it. There's other team members here too. So yeah, I would, please let us know if you have any questions or concerns. After that, hold an executive vote to enable the GSM delay, and we will know that we have this dark fix in our pocket if we need it. And if there's if something happens, we have something we can fall back to introduce a critical vulnerability patch. And that's all I've got. I think if anyone has questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Will. That was great. I can assure you that there's questions. I couldn't jump to the head of the queue. I think we can probably divide those questions into two buckets: is the technical questions and the social questions, right? And so I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. And it's going to be hard without figuring out what the user flow is here, what the use case.
I can give you
what the social layer looks like. But am I correct in understanding that what we're doing here is we're placing a kind of a significant level of trust in a group of the largest maker holders, and presumably these people are driven by profit motives. And so how can we trust them not to immediately exploit the system for gain? And if they do, like, how are they punished or be held accountable for those activities?
It's a good question. I'd argue you really don't. I mean, if you're going to get buy-in from someone and they're large MKR stakeholder, you really just share the information with them and hope that they're on board.
And do these people need to be identified, or is it just simply like this wallet has this much maker, and so they need to sign yes or no? Like, how do you? Yeah, I don't know. Are there non-disclosure agreements associated with this?
So one of the questions in the chat was, how do you get in contact with the maker holders? Which I think boiling down to Rich, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I can talk to this a little bit. So
yeah.
One of the things I like about the solution is that it kind of maps well on the gradual decentralization roadmap that we have. If you, on the one hand, look at the risk curve of critical vulnerabilities being found in the code, that one will drop over time, and the MKR distribution will get decentralized over time. So in other words, it will become harder and harder to get into contact with these larger MKR holders. But then at that time, maybe the risk of a critical vulnerability also drops below a certain level that doesn't matter anymore.
Sure, that's possible, but what do the actual mechanics look like? Like, are there thresholds in place, like 67 or whatever?
In the beginning, we have information. We know who the historical MKR holders are. We know who the investors are. So today we have no problem contacting these people.
I have a question. So I remember before, like, one proposed idea was we asked the community to trust us to remove the GSM, activate the bug fix, and then reactivate the GSM. And there was like a significant level of trust involved with that idea. Is there like an improvement on this version that at least kind of reduces any trust requirements somewhat? I mean, does it still kind of just boil down to asking?
So the improvement is that if you, this is more bounded in what can be done. So if you have these major MKR stakeholders vouching that they know what the vulnerability is, they understand what the proposed fix is, and they agree that this needs to be kept a secret for the benefit, like for the good of the ecosystem. So they agree, all these different MKR holders, they agree on a specific solution to a specific vulnerability. And if, on the other hand, if you just say like, hey, remove the GSM delay and let us, trust us, we'll do something and we'll fix this vulnerability, we can do anything we want at that point, right? And additionally, the GSM delay is never removed here. So the community has the opportunity to call, like, either use the emergency shutdown security module and trigger emergency shutdown, or if they have a majority of MKR voters, they can also just cancel the dark fix that is being pre-approved. So I would say there is significant. This is significantly better than just removing all guardrails and asking people to trust us.
Oh, so during the delay period, the community can see what the dark fix actually is, and then
no. This is exactly why it's a dark fix. All they can see is that there is going to be one, but they can be assured that at least some people have seen the code that fixes it, and we can create a hash of it, right? So we can.
What does that assurance look like, though? Like, are these large holders going to release a press release or something saying that we've seen it and we think it's cool, or like, how does that happen?
Let me give you an example of what I think this would go, right? So we know 5 of the largest MKR holders, including VCs, you know, like A16Z and whatever, Dragon something, I don't know, we have the addresses and this way to contact them. So there's a problem with the DSR contract that somebody can exploit and grab all the DAI that is there. We find it, and if there is a delay of a day and we create a spell and put the fix there, then they have 24 hours where they can look at exactly what we're fixing and exploit it, right? So what we can do is we can say, okay, we write the code to fix it, we hash it, so we create a hash that says that like nothing else in the universe hashes to this, or I mean, there's almost zero probability, and we show the fix to 5 of the largest MKR holders. They say, hey, we've seen the code, we vouch that it does that it fixes something. We put the spell on the blockchain, but the spell only has the hash. It doesn't have the code. The code only exists on the blockchain the moment after the GSM has passed, and it does everything in one transaction. So the only way to look at it would be live on the mempool for as long as it takes to be mined, which shouldn't be enough time to actually look at the code, see what it does, and exploit it. So that would be like a path to take. And I realize that this is going to take a lot of, like the community is going to argue a lot about this, and I'm hoping that they do. This is, like, I believe, a great fix for this. Like Wout said, it lets people, the community can vote this down. Let's say the delay is 24 hours. We say, okay, we have a dark fix in place. They can call emergency shutdown in those 24 hours, or they can remove that spell as a hat. They can unplot it, so unschedule it.
And to answer the specific question, how would MKR voters vouch for this, and would they be known? Like, would it be known who is vouching for this? So they, the most pseudonymous way that you can do it is that they sign a message. So they sign a transaction from the address which is holding a large amount of MKR, and they reference the hash of the fix, right? So that is a message that is, you are certain that it is signed by the owner of the MKR, and you are certain that they are approving the specific code that has that specific hash. So that's the most.
We know who they are. They're staking reputation at that point. Then, so what?
Yeah, so that's the most anonymous way of doing it. If you do know who it is, then indeed they are not only cryptographically proving that they're the ones agreeing to it, they're also staking their reputation. So that is correct. Like, if you think that an A16Z, for example, can afford to steal the pot of ETH, then you might want to trigger emergency shutdown instead.
So emergency shutdown is still sort of like one of the primary components of the system, is that there's still a significant decision that the community needs to make, whether they trust the people that have seen the code or are aware of the exploit.
Yeah, that's right. And it's kind of it's a trade-off where you require, it's some trust that you require, but it's still, it makes sense from a rational point of view. And you require the minimal trust for a very specific surgical operation on the system. So in that way, we're quite convinced that this is about the best trade-off that you can get.
Well, that's the key. That's the key summary, though. It's a trade-off, right? So it depends on what people consider minimizing of trust is. Minimizing to a smaller group of people, or do you minimize trust by having more people involved and spreading that decision around, I guess. But it works in the model where we have a small group of very large holders that are publicly identifiable. But when that changes, then the system doesn't work well as effectively, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. So it kind of maps well on the evolution of the MKR distribution, because the more decentralized we get in the future, the lower the probability will be that there are still critical vulnerabilities left in the system, because the system will have been battle tested and will have.
Yeah, well, presumably though, that's by no means certain. Right?
Yeah, one point
So-
is we're planning to upgrade the system as well, right? So like there's the chance of like new bugs being introduced later on, like after.
Yeah, there is no perfect solution, right? But
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, of all possible worlds, we believe that this is the best one that you'll get.
Why does it have to be large MKR holders versus say like why not as wide a net of community members as possible? Is there like there a game theory or an incentive here that I'm not?
It's because you're showing more people how to
Yeah,
exploit the
it's
system.
Well,
just
but
topic with
community,
it.
So, like,
well-known
but then,
community
like,
members have
but then, like-
identifiable reputations and they have trust already, right? So there's a different.
Yeah,
Right,
that's.
but then like hold on.
It's
but,
a
like,
good point.
Why aren't the devs enough? Like I trust the devs more than anybody, right? I trust Mariano more
Yeah, but
than
yeah,
the
yeah.
investors.
So that's a fair point, and you can definitely include trusted individuals who don't necessarily have a large MKR stake. So yeah, that's possible too. We didn't include it in the slides, but you can have the mix of the two. And you can even have something like the community saying, well, if this, we want that person to look at the code and and confirm that this is not an exploit, right? That can be done too.
You call me a boomer if you like, but like have people considered like why not get KPMG or somebody involved with this, and like somebody who's bonded? And
Yeah, I mean, definitely a solution, an auditor, like a security firm provide.
The reasoning for selecting large MKR holders is because they would have enough MKR to pre-approve the fix, right? So you need the large MKR holders. You need those on board, but you can definitely add other trusted parties. That's a very good comment.
Is the plan to speak to these large holders like before any problem arises, right? Like, are you going to prepare them for the fact that they may have to do this at some point?
Yeah, that's another thing, right? So you actually you can take as long, like if you find a critical vulnerability, there is no reason to assume that it will be exploited in the next week, right? I mean, it depends on the situation, but most of the time, not. So you can then take the time to properly explain this to these large MKR holders, give them time to audit this properly, and it has no relationship to the GSM delay, right? So it's not because the GSM delay is a day that they only have a day to review it or something. It has nothing to do with it. You can give them a week and then put up the spell for pre-authorization. They would vouch by signing a transaction. They would vote in the hash, and then it's up to the community to see if indeed the people who are vouching for this, that are they trustworthy enough to prefer this instead of emergency shutdown. That's basically the situation.
there's different mechanisms too that can be explored, right? Like potentially if we had highly visible professional international organizations who are in charge of auditing and dealing with security exploits could assure the large maker holders that they've evaluated it and signed off. We don't necessarily need to let them know what the exploit is. They just need to know that they can trust the group that does.
Yeah, but also keep in mind that this is probably time sensitive, right? So this is mostly to have the GSM delay, but I don't know, that it could be a fix for a bug that we find ourselves, some white hat finds it, but it could be something that even with all of this, we could be racing against time, right? For somebody.
Sure, there's all kinds of considerations.
Yeah,
I struggle to think of anything leakier than crypto though, so it's something to be considered. At least we can sue the shit out of KPMG or EY, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that EY also has, of course, a very extensive team with blockchain expertise. So they might be a very good combination of expertise and reputation at stake.
So just go back to the whole informing them thing. Like the situation I'm imagining is if you only inform them when you discover an exploit, right? And then you go and talk to them and like ask them to do this, they might just say like, we don't really know what we're doing, so like no. So what I'm saying is it not a better idea to confirm that those large maker holders would be willing to do this like before we decide to go down the dark fix route, right? Rather than something else, if there was something else.
Yeah, sure. And you can prepare this, right? So it's kind of like the weird thing about this solution is that we don't have to change anything in the system. Like nothing has changed since the moment when we said, well, back then we said it's better to wait with the GSM delay. Now nothing has changed, but for the fact that we have a possible solution in mind. And now we're saying, well, actually with this solution that we've theorized about, now actually we do feel confident of increasing the GSM delay. So you can kind of see how far you want to push that. Do you want to actually prepare the dark fix deployment by already going to these parties and having, for example, asking, for example, an EY to commit to that responsibility that they are willing to audit a potential dark fix? So you can already go to them and try and explain that. The fact that we recommend to wait at least another week to activate the GSM delay is because we see the same thing in the community, right? This seems to be a novel approach. Everyone can process it. We don't want to, we don't want to force this and like tomorrow suddenly vote in the GSM delay. And it's another good question, like how far do you want to go with like preparing this exact scenario? Might be a good idea to already go to this one of or a few of these companies. Yeah.
Well, it feels like there's some discussions to be had. So let's circle back again. So Wouter, can you confirm that the timeline here is that you guys want to put a proposal in the forums and then you want to launch this thing in the next week or two? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, if we need more time, we need more time. It's just that our recommendation is that give it at least a week so that people can process this new information. And but the point is, we don't need to change anything in the system as soon as as the community is on board, then we can actually proceed with introducing that GSM delay that so many people want.
Yeah, I think technically the solution is obviously elegant, so I think nobody can disagree with that. It's just the social coordination trust layers that still make me nervous.
Yeah, so can we re-explore the discussion of maybe separating, like if we're optimizing for trustworthy people, it doesn't necessarily have to be MKR holders, it could be third-party people. And then if the people that we're trusting are not the large MKR holders, then that means those same large holders will have to be trusting these third-party people just like the rest of the community. And it would prevent,
that's what I'm proposing though, right?
It would prevent having like almost like two social classes of MKR holders, like those who are privileged to see the fix versus those who aren't. If there's some other benefit of having like the MKR holders be that same group, then I think that I'm still not getting that part, but maybe there's like a different way to optimize for who these third parties are.
It's a fair comment, but I have to say, if I were a large MKR holder, which I'm not, but if I were, then I would definitely want to see the problem and the solution that is proposed.
Well, there's complexities here. If I was a large maker holder and I knew all the gossip about the other large maker holders, I would probably be willing to trade my not knowing as long as I make sure that they don't know either, right? So there's a lot of game theory to be considered here. If I was a large holder and I knew that KPMG had bonded this decision and whatever 20, 30 years of security protocols they put in place is now securing this thing, I'd be much easier. Well, this is all anecdotal. So, but I think that there's something to be explored here, that what we actually care about is that the large maker holders who need to pass these votes have confidence in the decision-making process. We don't need them to make the decisions themselves, right? That's the distinction.
Have we sort of considered a possibility where, so the sort of timeline would go like the dev team discovers that there's a bug, they know that they need to fix it, but they don't want to reveal the details of the fix. Like, could you not have a situation where the dev team says something like, we found a bug, we want to employ like this audit team to confirm it and to like make sure that everything's fine. So we want to like take money from the protocol to pay them, and then like they'll get paid, like they'll verify the fix, they'll say we verified it, and then you can start the actual dark fix. Like it's like we have, the protocol has like money, right? Like we could potentially use that to like pay groups to like bond these groups like riches.
It's definitely true, but I think that's mixing two two separate conversations. Personally, I think it would be better to keep them separate, but yeah.
I also think that with a bug, time is almost always going to be of the essence, and going to the community to get funding and then creating a contract with KPMG for them to audit the bug and stuff, it would just take so much longer than myself as a dev would feel comfortable letting a known bug sit in the wild.
I think that, well, it's at the very least, it's indicative of the types of conversations we can probably expect. These debates are going to go on for a while, so there's things to explore, and making assumptions about what people's or different organizations' availability or capacities might be possibly premature, but it's something we need to figure out, right? So this is going to be something that's going to surface in the forum thread that I'm hoping will get kicked off soon, and the community can start bouncing these ideas back and forth. I think that it might be a bit optimistic to have this thing go through in 2 weeks, but we should definitely kick the process off. Though. All right, that feels like a bit of a conversation killer, but I kind of intended it to be. So thanks, Wouter, Will, and Mariano for the hard work. There's a lot of really amazing thought, and like I said, it's an elegant solution. So.
Oh, and Will.
I did say Will, didn't I?
I think you said Wouter and Mariano.
No, you said Will too.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm jet lagged.
All right, I'm taking everybody except for Mariano. How's that? Okay, so we still need to talk about risk for a while. And like I said earlier, I cautioned everybody that it's a bit shambolic because we're all traveling around and we're all jet lagged and we're in a hotel, so I'm not going to put too much pressure on the guys. But do we have a state of the peg or migration that we need to talk about today?
I mean, need to is relative, but I'm happy to.
There we go.
Happy to share some stuff. Okay. Here, I'll share screen real quick. Voila.
37, you animal.
What's that?
37%.
Oh, well, 37 is much higher than it was earlier, so don't even get me started. So, yeah, the volumes, so just a fun note, the trading volumes for multi-collateral DAI compared to single collateral have in general been higher. I mean, the last 24 hours, you saw a pretty decent chunk of trading activity, which kind of makes sense with all the shit that's been going on with ETH. In the past with SCD as well, we'd seen spikes, you know, in the 14, 15 million psi range at certain times. But yeah, 24 million MCD traded in the last 24 hours, that's a pretty big chunk. So it's interesting to compare spikes nowadays versus spikes in the past, is the point there. But yeah, pretty much on peg, so we'll talk about this. I had tried to get this a little bit more evenly distributed out, so apologies for the fact that it looks like a Picasso, but yeah, this was another chart that I had created and trying to get it live so you don't just see it on these calls. But yeah, this is trades over time. So you can sort of see here that we'll see a spread above and below, and then kind of clustering closer towards this weighted average line, which makes a lot of sense. So let me also just compress this a little so you can see the fact that there were some crazy trades slipping above and below around that time frame. Yeah, so long story short, going back a few weeks here, around the second, third, we'd started to see some increase, uptick in the amount of trading activity. You saw basically a greater spread above and then a tighter grouping below. And then basically around the 9th, there was a few, well, around the 7th, 6th through the 9th, there were some trades that slipped below, so a few large lower trades, and then some trades that ran up above. A lot of people talked about that one Kyber trade, and yes, there was some obvious double counting with the fact that that gets relayed through Uniswap, which is hard to filter out, but I think that's being worked on. And so, yeah, we saw a few Uniswap trades really experiencing some heavy slippage there. In Kyber trade experiencing a run up there, and then Uniswap trades experiencing a dip, and then basically, sorry, I'm going to continue to compress this a little so you can see more. And then basically in the last 24 hours or so, a much tighter grouping of trades right around the peg. So there was some craziness, obviously, with rapid changes in ETH price, and sort of a lot of people presumably scrambling to obtain some MCD or sell some MCD for, or sorry, obtain and then subsequently sell off for ETH to lever up. But that all makes total sense. Yeah, so other things to note. So with the rise in ETH price, obviously, naturally, collateral amounts in dollar values rise. That's just math. So figured it would be good to revisit the collateralization ratio breakdown. Was interesting to note that obviously there's a huge amount of collateralization at the upper half of this graph, but still, you know, a pretty significant chunk. It's now closer to a third than, you know, a half, but about 40-ish million MCD that's at 300% collateralization or lower. It's more like 37 to be precise, but that's still something to note because some of this does go down as low as 175% collateralized. So this is a bit more like the graphs that we used to see for SCD. So it'll be more interesting to see what happens in the next few days because, you know, as ETH price rises, people tend to pull collateral out to sort of realize some of their profits and reduce their cost of capital, et cetera. So it will be interesting to watch if this collateralization sticks. Or, you know, if ETH goes up even further, then this could just become much more green. Yeah, so just to touch on, so 121 million total MCD, 117 of which from ETH. This is a graph of just the ETH, so we could look at back collateralization if folks want, but that obviously hasn't moved much. It's still the 1.6-ish million DAI coming from BAT. As far as the DSR, this is, again, come up sort of more or less proportionally, so we're now at 56% of the total DAI supply in the DSR, which is very interesting to watch, and there's some discussion that was happening on the Rocket Chat, et cetera, around what percent is expected over time, and short of inefficiencies, DAI moving around, et cetera, there's no reason that most of the MCD supply wouldn't just ultimately end up in the DSR.
Well, I have a question for you, Vishesh. Is there, it's an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is there an optimal level that we should be expecting or hoping for? Like, it feels to me like, don't we actually want people to be using DAI for stuff? Shouldn't it be in motion mostly, or at least a significant chunk of it?
Well, so this kind of goes back to, there's a difference between what you expect and what's good. So as far as what's expected, hard to say. I mean, maybe this tops out at like 75% eventually, but I think the things that presumably keep DAI out of the DSR would reasonably be either trust, the fact that it is moving too quickly and is in usage, or just a lack of awareness. Or, you know, maybe somebody supplying it elsewhere for better ratio, or using it as a collateral as well. So those would be the reasons that I would expect people not to lock DAI up in the DSR. And lock is, again, a terrible word, and I keep saying it, and then I keep saying it's a terrible word, but because it's never actually really locked in the DSR. So yeah, as far as what's expected, hard to say, but this number does keep creeping up. It does creep up slowly. So I think if you'd expected it to be like in the 90s, then I would have expected this number to already be like in the 70s or something like that. But if you're
So
talking
you think that
about,
maybe we're finding an equilibrium almost, and people are sorting it out?
yes and no. I mean, it did come up a pretty decent chunk, so that may have been a lack of awareness as well, or maybe the competitiveness of the rates. So I think you're not going to get me to quote anything on that. I think just stay tuned.
I already
But
quoted you on saying that ETH is going to moon any minute now, so we're good for this call.
I don't know where you got that. So the point being, I don't know. I mean, this number potentially could get up into the 70s. It's hard to say, and it's really interesting to note that this proportion is kind of kept and grown with the growth of the total DAI supply. So that is kind of interesting because it's kind of reinforcing this idea that as some people lever up, those that are purchasing or obtaining that DAI in other ways are ultimately putting it in the DSR. And it does kind of make sense if you think about it, because if you have DAI and you're holding on to it, there's no reason to not supply it here or elsewhere. And I think the interesting metric, so I'll pull this up as we're talking, but the interesting thing ultimately to note would not just be the percent of DAI locked up in the DSR, but it would be the total amount locked up in the DSR inclusive of, I don't know why I pulled up compound, that was actually a bad choice, inclusive of where else it's being supplied for yield. So, whether that be through DYDX or other apps, plus where it's being used as collateral. And then sort of, if you subtract all of those stagnant pools of DAI, you kind of get this metric of what's being used or circulating freely. And so that's a different metric that actually I haven't seen anyone show. So maybe that's something that we can start to look at as well. Okay, so don't want to harp too much on total DAI supply and DSR. One other thing that I wanted to show, which is actually not this, but I will pull this up as well, was a quick calc on the outstanding CDPs, or sorry, outstanding vaults. But before I do that, let's just double check where we're at with this. So yeah, this total DAI plus DAI supply has continued to grow. It's just been a steady sort of growth over time. I guess some of those lines go janky in the middle, but yeah, it's been a steady growth over time despite that one dip that we talked about to death already. But that's a pretty significant growth rate if you look at it in comparison to the long-term DAI supply. So definitely some increased usage activity and interest, and I would go so far as to say demand in the recent weeks. But yeah, so that's continued to grow despite the fact that migration is proceeding and DAI supply has continued to fall. So this is, for all intents and purposes, a good graph. This is a positive indicator. So yeah, last thing I wanted to touch on was just some of the earns that are sitting out there. I kind of did a quick tool here, just like some Google Sheets queries for the percent of supply that's living with how many CPs, so, or how many vaults. Yeah, that's gonna get hard to remember to do. So yeah, the top one vault has 10% of the supply. The top two is 18, 3, so on and so forth, and you get where this is going. So top 10 is 42%, top 20 is 53, top 30 jumps up to 61, and so on and so forth. And basically, this is a little bit less concentrated than SCD, as Primoz had talked about prior, but it's like less than 100 vaults that have 82% of the total supply. I mean, I think it's most interesting to look at top 20, which is more than half. So that's pretty significant. Yeah. And then the collateralization, which I actually did not have time to throw in here, but I was going to, which I could try to be real clever and punch it in at the last minute, but I won't torture you watching me do this. I'll just put it in the chat a little bit later. Yeah, but the long story short is we can see the top vaults collateralization ratios here. So the number one had jumped up to 500%. The number two is sitting down at 225%. So we'll ignore the sort of heavily collateralized ones, but it's just interesting to mention, this one with sort of 9 million at 225 and this one with 3.9 million at 275, so on and so forth. Some really large vaults do have some comparatively low collateralization ratios. So these were things to watch, and maybe, hungry liquidators are hanging on every word here. But
is that
yeah.
real-time data? So there's somebody out there in this market?
I updated this like a few minutes ago, so not real time, but yeah. Okay. Cool. I will leave it there for now.
So somebody has a CDP open that's 200% collateralized with 1.9 million DAI drawn on it. Is that what I just saw?
Yeah, looks to be.
Optimistic. I love it. I guess ETH is never going down.
The price did also come down a few bucks, just sort of suddenly. So that was maybe a temporary tick or something.
All right, Cyrus. I took control of your risk segment by accident. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
It's okay. No, I think that's it from us today.
Okay, there was, we generally have a Q&A session at the top of the hour, and we're 24 minutes into that segment, so we might not have time. So I think that we might be wrapping it up in a few minutes. Vishesh just won't stop talking about how ETH is going to moon. Come on, guy. You can't be giving buy signals like that. All right, I think that we'll put a fork in it there. There's lots of important discussions that need to be had. LongForWisdom talked about the number of signals that we have in the forums right now. Those require attention from the governance ecosystem. The engineers / architects of smart contracts will be posting something about the dark fix and how that affects the GSM. I would dearly love this community to put the word out and join in that discussion to figure out how we solve the social layer problem here, because for me, that's the tricky and messy one. And so that needs some thought, and then we'll get that thing sorted out in governance in real time in the forums. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks Rich for hosting. Thank you everyone.
Bye.
So